Fifth grade ELA, text set 5, the power of knowledge. The essential question is, how can we obtain knowledge and use it for good? Infer the larger messages in a biography. Who knows some poems by heart? Can you imagine poems being used for a serious purpose, such as to change people's minds about an important issue? We're about to read about a poet who wrote poetry to make things better for people in his country. This book is called Pablo Neruda, Poet of the People, by Monica Brown, illustrated by Julie Paskowitz. The book might change the way you think about poetry. Once there was a little boy named Naphtali who loved wild things wildly and quiet things quietly. From the moment he could talk, Naphtali surrounded himself with words that whirled and swirled just like the river that ran near his home in Chile. Chile is a country in South America. What is unusual about the illustrations? How do the words in different languages help you know something about Naphtali? Okay. Naphtali loved to play in the forest, ride horseback, and swim in the river with his friends. Naphtali's father was a train conductor, and sometimes he would take his son with him on the train. Whenever the train made a stop, Naphtali would run off into the forest to search for beetles and birds, eagles, and tall ferns that dribbled water like tears. Naphtali wasn't very good at soccer, at throwing acorns like his friends, but he loved to read and discover magic between the pages of books. A very special teacher named Gabriela Mistral gave him wonderful books from faraway places, and Naphtali decided he wanted to be a writer too. So what do these illustrations tell you about Naphtali's environment in Chile? Is he always outside? When he was a teenager, Naphtali changed his name to Pablo Neruda and began publishing his poems. He always wrote in green ink, the color of the ferns in the forest and the grass beneath his feet. Pablo moved to the big city of Santiago and met other writers. Together, Pablo and his friends walked the streets wearing great black capes and tall hats. They talked about books and shared their poems with all who would listen. Why might Naphtali have changed his name to Pablo Neruda? Pablo means small or humble, and Neruda means the name of a poet Naphtali admired. Why would any writer or performer change his or her name? Pablo wrote poems about the things he loved, things made by his artist friends, things found at the marketplace, and things he saw in nature. He wrote about scissors and thimbles and chairs and rings. He wrote about buttons and feathers and shoes and hats. He wrote about velvet cloth, the color of the sea. Pablo loved opposites, so he wrote about fire and rain, spring and fall. In the streets and with his friends, Pablo saw joy and sadness, so he wrote about both. Pablo loved the stones of Chile. He wrote about stones rolled by waves onto the beach, and stones polished by sand and salt. He wrote about stones tumbling down the mountain tops, and stones in the hands of the stone cutters. Pablo loved the sea and the feel of the sand beneath his feet. He loved walking along the beach near his home in Chile. He found starfish and seaweed, red crabs, and green water. He saw dolphins playing in the surf and rusty anchors washed ashore. Pablo wrote about the children who played in the sea, foam in the sand, skipping stones and chasing waves. He wanted each child to share in Chile's wealth and hope. Pablo had many homes. One was in Spain, half a world away. This home was called the House of Flowers because of the red flowers blooming from every corner. The House of Flowers was always filled with dogs and people, young and old. Because above all things and above all words, Pablo Neruda loved people. Pablo loved mothers and fathers, poets and artists, children and neighbors, and his many friends around the world. He opened his arm to all. When Pablo saw the coal miners working dangerous jobs for little money, he was angry. When he saw that they were cold and hungry and sick, he decided to share their story. He joined those who fought for justice and wrote poems to honor all workers who struggled for freedom. Even when his poems made leaders angry, he would not be silenced, because he was a poet of the people. So we've read about objects Pablo loved. Now what he is writing about. Now what is he writing about? What do you think the author means when she says Pablo wrote poems to honor all workers who struggled for freedom? How might poems help those struggling for freedom? When soldiers came to get him, Pablo hid in the homes of friends and then escaped on a horse over the mountains of Chile. Pablo Neruda was brave. He wasn't afraid to share the story of Chile with the world. So what kind of poems might result in a person's arrest? What do you think Pablo's story of Chile might have told the world? Pablo's voice was heard across nations and oceans. From his poems grew flowers of hope and dreams of peace. So what do you think the author means when she says the flowers of hope and dreams of peace grew from Pablo's poems? How do you imagine finding hope or peace through poems? Authors know. Pablo Neruda is considered one of the greatest and most influential poets of the 20th century. He was born Richard Eliezer Naftal Reyes Bosato in Parral, Chile in 1904. When Naftal was growing up, his father didn't approve his poetry, so Naftal began publishing poems behind his father's back under the name Pablo Neruda. During his lifetime, Neruda was a student, a diplomat, a senator, an activist, and a fugitive. But always and above all, Pablo Neruda was poet, the poet of the people. Among his most famous works are, I'm not going to say all those. He won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1971. Pablo Neruda died in Chile in 1973, and a few days later, his friend, the poet Yevgeny Yevaskyul, wrote, "He carries his poetry to the people as simply and calmly as a loaf of bread." Today's Pablo's house in Chile on Isla Negra still stands with feelings of love and hope. Women and men from all over the world visit to celebrate the poet of the people. Each time we read one of Pablo's poems, he is with us, inspiring us to love and to make our voices heard.